we need to keep this spirit alive. We need to keep talking about this so that, first of all, perhaps newcomers to this get inspired and they're like, wow, there's people that are doing this, thinking about this, talking about this, but also for people that are in this lifestyle to not forget that they're not alone.
The necessities of our life, we've outsourced everything. We've put middlemen in between us and the things that are most important. What this whole movement is about, what you and I are passionate about, what this podcast will be about, is all those various ways in which we can connect directly to our food, to our neighbors, to our community, to our work and what we do, to our own hands and bodies and the environment around us. I feel like it's just so clear when you zoom out and see that picture of like a meaningful life and a life that you would actually want to live. It's like so obvious why there was a Back to the Land movement. Why are so many people driven to this?
Yeah.
It's right there.
Today is our first episode, Chris.
First episode,
Yeah.
finally.
Finally. It's been a long time in the works.
This has been spoken about for a few years, at least.
Yeah.
And lots of people, I think, have asked you over time, do you have a podcast? Why are you not starting a podcast? And what took it to this point?
I've been on a lot of podcasts and I like talking. I like discussions. I think we, instead of having sound bites and clickbaits and all these things, like a real podcast, what's great about it is that you can have conversations and it's just like the real shit gets talked about. And I like that. I guess over the years, like I thought I could have one, we could do one, but I needed somebody to do it with. And that's where you came along. And, we've been doing YouTube videos for quite a while now and together. And I think we have a really good bond and a good fit. And I don't know when the idea of the podcast came in, but you just kind of like, you took it. And
this past summer, I spending so much time on YouTube videos, but not necessarily always getting the result we wanted.
Yeah.
I was like, there has to be other things we can do.
Yeah.
That potentially take less time, meaning just not 2 to 3 days of editing something, but can also like have major impact out there and move people and motivate, inspire, all that, and educate. And it just seemed that the podcast was such a no-brainer move to make.
and I think part of it also, Chris, and you can acknowledge this, I think, is, you are also a very deep person within the movement. You've been with this movement for so many years. You're not just like this videographer that was filming over the last 2-3 years. You're part of the movement. You've moved here to Quebec from New Jersey. I think we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, sure.
And I just felt that doing this with you would also be fun because we're going to meet guests and we're going to be talking about food, farming, the restaurant world, the community, lifestyle, all of that. These are all issues that, our community here in Frelighsburg, there's so many farmers that it's such a great topic, and it just felt like exposing this to a wider audience.
Yeah, where we live feels like a model of where I want more of the world to go, and having this podcast feels like a way to push that train along and try to motivate more people to get involved and make their communities that way and just create the kind of world that we want to live in.
Yeah.
And we kind of see it firsthand where we live, like a pretty good version of how life can be. So I think that's a big motivation for both of us.
Yeah. And we should, if you want, we can, I don't want to say jump into it, but where we live is special. Around Frelighsburg and all the eastern townships where we are, there's 40, 50 small organic farms. And in our village of Frelighsburg, we have Wednesday night farmer night at the local cafe. There's just like a lot of small shops. There's now the farm to table restaurant here at the old mill. There's others, there's local breweries. There's everything that we need to feel good about food, agriculture, farming, community. It's just here.
Absolutely. And actually, speaking of that, where are we exactly right now? For anyone watching this on video form on YouTube, you'll see us in this lovely space that we've set up, and we are at where?
We're at the old mill. The old mill. We're at the Old Mill, as you know, Chris. This is the new farm to table restaurant that we opened last year. So we're gonna, it's been a year. We opened like about a year ago, and after 7 beautiful years at FQT Farm, which we'll probably have a chance to talk about today, I just felt like after COVID, I wanted to come back home and just actually enjoy the beautiful community that we have and all these networks and all these beautiful farmers and entrepreneurs that are around here. I just wanted to be part of that crowd again. And opening the restaurant here was an opportunity to do both. And so the Old Mill is the office space for the Market Gardener Institute, where you work, Chris. And there's also a restaurant that is open from Thursday to Sunday. And it's 100% local. All the ingredients come from the area. We work directly with all the local farmers for most of the meats and other products, and the vegetables come from the garden where I now garden. So,
yeah. Speaking on that note of when you wanted to bring it all back home, that reminds me when I first started making videos with you, and you were still at FQT very often, and I was thinking to myself, I don't want to go there that often just because it was an hour-long drive, and I'm not a big fan of the long drive. So I was like, I want to film more around here. And then voila, this whole project opened up, and I was like, sweet, I only got to go 15 minutes to the farm, and we can make any video we want. And I don't know, that's just a little aside.
No, but it's true. It's like keeping it local. And actually, having a podcast or having, an audience that's global, but talking about local stuff. I think that's really cool, because that's where it's at. We want to have a global outreach and an impact, but we're actually interested in doing things locally in our community.
Absolutely. You know what? We're definitely going to circle back to that because I feel like that's a huge piece of just the big vision in our minds. But I figure we should maybe first start with introducing ourselves.
Sure.
And from there, we'll get into what we want this podcast to be all about. And
who's first?
Plans. Let's start with you. I'll ask you some questions,
Okay.
Jan.
All right.
Because some people listening might not know much about you, and maybe some do. They've heard your story often, but let's just start off with a big, broad question. JM, what has been this big mission you've been on for the last 20 years? What have you been doing all this time?
Well, let's bring it down to the, the real things. Like my wife, Moran, she'll be on the podcast in the near future. We started farming in our early 20s. We graduated from university, and, we woofed on a farm for 2 years in New Mexico. We discovered farming there. We knew nothing about farming. I say this often, but both of our parents weren't hippies and that farming community in New Mexico was just epic. It was so tight and it was so delightful. And we had an amazing farmer's market in Santa Fe. And so for 2 years we were there. And when Madeleine got pregnant, we decided to come back in Quebec. And we lived in a teepee for 2 years here in Frelighsburg. And that's where,
Sorry, where exactly was it?
In Frelighsburg, it's not far from where you live, actually. Where there's the old duck farm, La Girondine.
Okay.
Just before the border, we live on the border here, and we're people don't know this, but we're like 2 miles from the U.S. border.
Yeah, I'm like a 5-minute walk to the border line from my house.
Yeah. So so La Girondine, it's called.
Okay.
And we didn't know that area. I just had a feeling that this was a super cool place, and it's warm weather. It's one of the most beautiful, warmest weather here in Quebec. So, and I called them up and I said, you know what? Like, I'm looking for a place to do a garden, and they had a kind of a farm to table thing. Mm-hmm. They would raise ducks, and they would serve all that French cuisine, and that's really where I got hooked on French cuisine, because they were French, and they were cooking their cassoulet, and they were cooking all this beautiful French cuisine. And we called them up and said, we'd like to do a garden. We can supply your table with fresh vegetables, and we would just move and set up a teepee. And are you with that? And they said, let's do it. we're very interested. This sounds wonderful. You're young. We need relève. And so for 2 years we were there. And that was really the start of our story because, obviously not coming from the area, people didn't know us, but they certainly heard about the two young, parents, because we had a toddler at that time that were living in a teepee and that were producing amazing salad mix that we would bring to the local grocery store at Gosselin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was in 2002. So we were there for 2 years. We fell in love with the area. And back in the days, Chris, I don't know if you know this, but there was one other organic farm, and that was Fred from Tessa Gardens. He's like,
Of course.
the most excellent farmer I know.
And still killing it.
Still killing it. Has 35 years of experience, and he's like just like the best of the best, really. The most humble guy. So if ever we have him on the podcast, he's not going to say that. But, he is the it's like a machine of knowledge, of experience, of insight, of workmanship. Because when you're with Fred at his farm, he's not just kind of telling people what to do. He's still doing it. And he leads by example. But that's another story. But it was him, and that was it. And I remember that he was telling Modelen and I that he was kind of bummed out because we were moving in, and that was his turf. And there was already one organic farm, and that was, we didn't need two.
And now there's how many, you think?
Yeah, there's like about 40 farms in our area.
Wow.
Yeah, we've trained a lot of them at my farm, and Fred trained a lot also at his farm. And now, after all these years, like the people that we train are also training other farmers, and that's why there's such a big community. And we talked about the Wednesday night farmer night, but that's where everybody comes together here in the village, and it's epic. So 2 years of doing this on rented land, and we bought a farm. We bought a rabbit barn here in the area. And that's really where, what I've been doing for the last 15 years took off, because we bought it was 10 acres and a prairie that was about 3 acres, in the middle of which there was this rabbit barn. And so the gardens were about 2 acres max. And then, there's different habitats for biodiversity that we've designed and built over the years, but there's also a pond. So really the garden is 1.5 acres. And by design and also by constraint, because that's what we had. And we built our house inside the rabbit barn, and now it's a pretty beautiful house. But, if I ever show you pictures of how it was before, it's a barn. It's a big 40 by 100 barn.
Yeah, I've seen, well, actually, if you go on YouTube, anyone listening, and watch there's a video, 20 years of market gardening, something like that. You'll see some of the photos, and it's quite a transformation. It's really inspiring because originally it was just a flat grass field with this barn and like very minimalist. And I think metal, not a...
No, it was just like open field, nothing there. But actually, I think a lot of young people that get into farming, that's what's attractive to them. It's like it's a canvas, and it's bare. And then, for me, coming from suburbia and going at university and being trained to become probably my upbringing was I was supposed to become a lawyer or something like that, but not a worksman. Or a blue collar worker or something like that. That's not my upbringing. But actually working with your hands, and I know you know this because that you're passionate about that, that's life. And I realized that as I was doing this, wow, this is amazing. I am crafting my own environment. I'm digging, moving rocks, planting trees, building gardens, growing food that I'm selling directly. And all of this for me at that time just felt so empowering. And I just knew in my heart that we were part of something good. And we had studied ecology and environment at uni. So, we studied global warming 25 years ago. And we were just kind of on the road to be impactful with our work. We were reading a lot of Scott and Helen Nearing's Living the Good Life. We were reading this and we're like, oh man, we want to dig our pond and we want to build our house. So we did it all. like many people doing back to the land. And so I don't know how long I want to talk here, but that was 2004, and so it's been 20 years. The farm is still there.
How did that then move? How did that segue into you writing the book? Because that's really where I think like your second form of your career took off, was at the book.
Yeah.
So what happened there?
Yeah. So after 8 years of running the farm, building and running the farm, our farm got actually successful pretty fast. And, we're close to Montreal. But at that time, we were only selling locally. We had a CSA of about 100 boxes that we would deliver. Each of these little village around here, we had a route we would deliver. We were at the Knowlton Farmers Market Saturday morning, which was really picking up, and we were always getting more demand for the produce, and so we didn't have more land. So instead of just like taking the traditional route of just like growing more on just like bigger pieces of land, we had to concentrate and figure out how to grow more on the same piece of land. And so I was reading a lot of biointensive farming techniques. I read Elliot Coleman many, many times. We'll probably talk a lot about Elliot on this podcast. He's been so influential for me. But we just figured out. We went to Cuba also. We visited farms there. We went to France, visited a lot of year-round growers there. And we just kind of put all that into our farming, and we got a lot of result with not that many input. And to sum it up, we were seeing that we were producing a lot. We were selling almost everything directly. We were making a pretty good profit for the time. And our farm didn't cost a lot to set up. And the profit was also a product of that. And, I was going to farming conferences in the winter, listening to the stories that were told there. Most farmers, the discussion was always about scaling up.
Yep.
That was like everybody needed to scale up. That was the only route to get out of poverty and to make your farm work, was how to scale up. And all the workshops, all the conversations were about tractor, machinery, which one, how, all of that. And I was like, that's not what we're doing. And we're getting pretty good results. And, after working with Equiterre is a NGO here that's been kind of like an umbrella organization that promotes CSA throughout Quebec. So all the farmers are united under that umbrella, and they promote for everyone. And then clients and customers can sign up on each people's farm. We can talk about that another time, but I was working with them to create a guide to help young people start in farming. And I worked with other farmers on that guide for almost 3 years. And when it came out, I was actually super disappointed, because we were kind of showing all the different ways to do things. So you had all these different farmers giving their perspective and their methods on how to do all these things. And I was reading this, I was like, I'm confused, because if I want to know something and I'm seeing all these different ways of doing things, I'm actually confused, because there's different ways to do this. And I thought it would be better if we have one way, one guide, one mentor, just like we were already training people at that time. We were showing them how to do things, and then they would replicate, duplicate, and then have success on their farm. And so, that's where the idea of the book came about. And I took 1 full year off the farm to write it. Modern, and you can ask her when she comes, like it was scary. We had 2 kids at the time. We had a mortgage. Our wages weren't super high. We were making an income and a living, but it wasn't what it is now. And it just took a year to write the book, and then it took off. This episode is brought to you by Bootstrap Farmer. Bootstrap Farmer is an amazing company. It's focused on making high quality, durable, and ecological products for farmers and gardeners. They really stand out for me because 1, they manufacture their product right in the US instead of relying on overseas factories. And 2, They're focused on durability and sustainability. This means no single-use plastics that you have to rebuy every year, and no cheap, flimsy metal that won't last. Their hoop house kits are among the best out there, made of super thick galvanized steel that will stand out to the elements and last you a very long time, I guarantee it. And their seating trays are absolutely indestructible. Believe me, we did a test here at the farm. A car ran over the trays and they literally didn't even deform. On top of that, Bootstrap team is passionately dedicated to seeing the farming community grow and thrive. And that really means so much to me. You know that's why I do what I do here at the Market Gardener Institute. So if you care about what kind of companies you support with your dollars, check out Bootstrap Farmer. You can find them out at bootstrapfarmer.com. Thank you, Bootstrap, for all you do. Love you guys. See you soon.
And from there, it took you to traveling and speaking. And then I just want you to kind of go through these as segues from one to the next. And then that led to FQT in some fashion, which also Market Gardener Institute. So if you can kind of go through those.
Yeah. It's just like, it's 20 years of different activities and involvement. But so wrote the book. First, it was in French. And it was number 2 bestseller on the bestseller list here in Quebec. I have a picture, Chris. I'd like to show you this one time, but it's you go into the library, the bookstore. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
And then it was 50 Shades of Grey, number 1, and then you had the Market Gardener, number 2.
That's wild.
And that was because when they printed the book, they had a low print because nobody thought that this book would become something. I was actually turned down twice, and I needed to pay the publishing house for them to edit and take on the book. So I did a Kickstarter, raised money. I had a lot of beautiful people that helped me at that time. I was really passionate about it, and the book was all... all the drawings were there. I had done everything. It was all edited. It was ready to barbecue, ready to go. But still, people said, a farming book. There's a lot of farming books. Why is this one? And it was very practical. And people were like, there's how many farmers? There's not a big audience. I've heard that all my life. And actually, there's a pretty big audience for people that want to farm or that are farming. But so what happened is that the print wasn't enough. And then people got interested in the book. People started to talk about it. I got some press coverage, and it was back ordered for like 6 weeks, 7 weeks. But people kept buying the books at the bookstore. And so when the book was re-released after the print, like that week, all the people got their copies, and it was the number 2 and that week of the bestseller. So anyway,
cool accomplishment.
Yeah, I was happy about that. And it was a big relief because a lot of energy and like most projects that people do, you're not sure of if it's going to be a success. You're taking a lot of risk. You're spending money. You're doing something from your heart, but you don't know the outcome. And the book got translated in English, and I started to tour and talk about the book and our farming practices. I showed people how to use black tarps, silage tarps, like nobody was doing that. Talking about permanent beds, showing all the different specs for the vegetables, looking at all the tools that we were using, how all that worked into a system, talking about crop planning, how to have successions, how to plan out the year, how to have a crop rotation, how to design the farm, all these things that we had done and learned and really polished over the year. I was presenting, and people were really interested. And as I was invited, I kept promoting, touring, and eventually the book became, it started to have a life of its own. I think now, the book spreads. People read it and they're like, they pass it on. Just like when I read Elliot Coleman's book. That was the first farming book that I read, The New Organic Grower. And when we were farming, there was one German grower, I remember, and Norbert was his name, and he said, if you're farming organically, read this book. It's really good, The New Organic Grower. And that became my go-to Bible. And so that was probably 3-4 years of kind of touring, visiting a lot of places, meeting a lot of growers, visiting farms. I've always visited farms. And eventually, Mr. D, that I've met through Elliot Coleman, who was a very wealthy businessman from Canada. That's how he was introduced to me. Wanted to start a farm, a holistic farm. And I was like, oh, holistic farm, very wealthy businessman, billionaire from Canada. And I was like, eh. And I turned it down like 3 times. Elliot was calling me, say, hey, I want you to meet this guy. He's really good project I'm involved in. It's like, Elliot, like I don't want to work for a billionaire. Like I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing, and we have a great farm. And eventually he insisted. He came to my farm, and he said, you know what, JM, like I really want you to come and meet this guy. It's all that I ask. And so Modène and I, we went and we met Mr. Desmarais, which is it's a big name here. The Desmarais family is like royalty. They're very, very wealthy and very secretive. We don't know much about them except that they run Power Corporation, and that it's been a powerful family for like 40 years here in Quebec, involved in politics and all of that. And coming from someone like me from the left and being more of a
rebel.
Yeah, rebel. And it's kind of a funny match. And when we met, we just hit it off. And he was interested in creating something for the greater good. He was at Stone Barns a lot. You know Stone Barns?
Of course.
So he was at Stone Barns a lot. That was his influence. And he wanted to do something like that here in Quebec, but something different. He wanted to have a holistic farm with animals, with a culinary part to the farm, and vegetables. And I was hired, I was asked if I would supervise the vegetable part, but more and more I got into the project. I was like, man, this is an amazing opportunity, because it was clean slate. And so I took over the project. And for 2 years, I researched, designed, and we eventually built the farm with a lot of money. Like, it was the biggest permaculture project in Canada. It's like for 2 years, we had 2 excavators creating hedgerows, creating, different landscapes to have the animals that would be grazing around the market garden, building the culinary lab, doing research, meeting the people, making sure that it was like, really on par. And and my thing with that farm was that I wanted to have kind of a school where I could train young market gardeners to my methods, but also just like to expose them to the hardship of farming and give them really the tools and the techniques and all the manual inputs that you need to know. And so I designed that too, and I ran that farm for 7 years. Yeah.
And that brings in the Market Gardener Institute, which is, we're at the headquarters right now. It's where I work. It's really, and it's a company of education, among other things. But can you tell me about the Market Gardener Institute?
Yeah, the Market Gardener Institute was created because when I was running FQT Farm, so I had a crew of 10. Okay, so we have, the way it's set up, we have first year apprentice. They're paid, and it's a 45-hour workload per week. But they're in their first year, and they're kind of learning the ropes, and we show them how to do all the different things on the farm precisely. And then we have 3 to 4 second year that they did a first year, and now they're in second year, and they're managing the first year. And I'm working with the second year staff to help them become good managers. And so together we go through the process of dealing with problems with the staff, how to dispatch, how to manage overload, how to organize your week, your days to be efficient, to manage the crew. And so I could talk in lengths about that, but what was your question again, Chris? The Market Gardener Institute. Yeah. So I hope this won't happen too much in this podcast, but actually it won't be about me talking. It's just for today.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I researched best practice about how to do everything on the farm. And we applied it, and then we measured, how to harvest the carrots. Is it by doing it that way or that way? The spacing for all the vegetables. Is it more productive, 4 rows, 8-inch, or 3 rows, 12-inch? All these things, I was gathering data, I was measuring, and I was doing all these experiments to figure out the best standard operating procedures. And then eventually, after a few years, we started to film it. So I had our good buddy, Alex, come to the farm almost every day. And then slowly what happened is that he was filming what I was teaching to the others in details. And we filmed that for 4 years. And eventually we put it up into a class that became the Market Gardener's Master Class. And when we launched, overnight, almost 450 people signed up for the class.
Wow.
And so that was a big influx of money, and it just created a business. And then 6 years later, the Market Gardener Institute is promoting the master class that we keep adding on to. But we just launched Heirloom, the crop planning software. We have other classes on greenhouse production. There's a bunch of classes, and then there's we're 12 now?
You mean employees?
Yeah.
Or
how many are we?
good question. I never really made a count.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, we're about 12, I think, working at the Institute. And as you know, now the classes and the workshops are in 90 countries. And we've created a community that's worldwide, really designed for growers.
Yeah, and we create content on YouTube and now this podcast.
And it's one project leading to the other, and then the old mill, as we talked about. And the Institute is embedded in the old mill. It's the office space during the week, and it's the restaurant space during the weekend. And, that's just pretty much all the project that I've been a part of.
And then lastly, growers and Heirloom, quickly, if you want.
Okay, so lastly, Growers & Co. For people that don't know, that's a company that I also started pretty earlier in 2015. I had my first stint at Growers, and my vision for Growers was to have a tool and apparel company. That was this tools and apparel designed by growers for growers. That's pretty much what we do. We have a beautiful clothing section of garments that are made for field work, and garments that also not is off after farm things, but tools also. And the project at first was kind of loose and not defined, but it started to pick up in 2020, just before COVID. Mm-hmm. We launched the magazine, Growers & Co. magazine. It's probably the project that I'm most proud of. It's really epic, telling the stories of different farmers and really answering the why of how, and not how they farm, but why they farm, and showing them in a beautiful light to inspire others and to make us feel good about the work that we do. And so the magazine got really popular, and that kind of kickstarted the brand. And now, we're still working on it, developing new tools, new clothing lines, and we're partnering with different projects and different suppliers in different parts of the world. And it's just a pretty cool project also.
Absolutely. And Heirloom, probably the newest thing in the fleet.
Yeah, Heirloom is the last of the big entrepreneurial project that I'm a part of, and it's based here. And it's a crop planning software. It's actually an ERP. So eventually now it's doing crop planning for market gardeners. It's pretty sophisticated. It has some AI built into it, but it's going to have more. But it's really taking all of the things that I was kind of testing, trialing, developing at FQT Farm that was on spreadsheet, and then putting it into a SaaS software on demand. And it's pretty sophisticated. It's for me, it envisions what I see as the future of small scale farming, which is our farms are small, they're local, but we're using technology, we're using the best tools available, we're highly productive, we're professionally, organized, but we have small farms. That's really my vision, and we multiply these farms. That's my vision for the future of farming. But Heirloom is kind of the tech side of everything that we do. And it took 3 years to launch because it's so much money that goes into developing a software. And I was working with Tend before. It's another software in California. I helped them design that. And at one point I was having a lot of problems with Tend. It just wasn't evolving fast enough. And I was like, you know what, let's just start from scratch and do something better. And then we launched Tend, was it like 2 months ago?
Heirloom?
Heirloom, yeah, Heirloom. So Heirloom was launched 2 months ago, and there's already 1,600 people.
I think Alex told me last week 2,000.
2,000? Man, that's...
People that are like trying it out.
Yeah,
currently.
That's super exciting because like there's one aspect that people don't see is all these projects, all these things that look great. Like you look at the Growers & Co magazine, you're like, wow, this is epic. You look at Heirloom, you're like, wow, this is epic. You come here at the restaurant, you're like, man, this is awesome. This is world class. But the amount of work, the struggle, the hardship, the nights where I'm totally not sure of myself, the amount of money that I re-inject in my projects, that I borrow, all these things, they're not easy. And so, rewards for me are now important because I'm like, it's not easy to convince other people to join and to create a sense of community with all these people. That's where the old mill is important for me because we're all here together. It's a beautiful space. There's the gardens. But yeah, there's hardship in all of that. So yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just roses.
Absolutely. So I think if you're listening, you're probably getting an idea in your head of what this podcast will probably be about based on your mission up to this point, your journey. But shall we switch gears and
let's
introduce
do
myself?
you.
How about you want to cue me in with some questions so I don't ramble too much?
Chris Moran.
Moran is how I say it, but in an Irish accent.
Yeah, great.
Moran.
And you look a little bit Irish.
A little bit, yeah.
And you look beautiful. And
thank you.
You've moved here a few years ago.
2019.
And I don't know if you're going to go there, but you married a really wonderful woman. I was at your party, at your wedding.
Yep.
And she's Francophone.
Yep.
And you're from the US. And the question brings me to, what got you here and what were you doing before? Because you were involved in farming down in Jersey.
Yes.
So...
Yep, I became a farmer in 2015. And just like you, I grew up in the suburbs, not at all in that kind of environment, and stumbled upon farming. I won't go too deep into exactly how it happened, but I met these people that had a small farm, a bunch of hippies basically, and I just saw what they were doing. I was like, what on earth? This is so damn cool. I just never seen that before. I had no exposure to it, knew nothing about the world of farming, but was so attracted to it because I was a lover of the outdoors and nature. And so as soon as I could, like a room opened up at the house where the farm was. It was 20 minutes from where I lived currently. I was a personal trainer at Rutgers University at that time, and I started my own business of teaching parkour in nature and play in nature. I was all about connection to nature, which kind of makes sense why I could see so much meaning in farming. So yeah, I moved there immediately. It was a euphoria. And we were a big old crew of like punks and hippies, actually.
Like a motley crew.
What it was. And every Wednesday, everyone that lived at the house, there was like 8 of us, had to work the farm for the whole day. That was the agreement, because not everyone there was a worker of the farm. A lot of people had other jobs, but they lived there. And so 2 people were assigned to each meal of the day, and we'd all be making, like, one Wednesday you had to do breakfast, another Wednesday you do lunch, and it was this whole just amazing day of working outside, eating together.
Wow.
And it was powerful stuff.
Wow.
And I was just so happy with the new experience, because before that I was living in a small city in New Jersey, and just, I don't know, life was just all right, but it wasn't like moving me and meaningful in that way. So that was a 10-acre farm. Actually, like, your book was in the house. I remember we were doing very market gardening style farming, small scale. But the people behind the vegetable farm, they did want to go further, and they were into building out a larger operation. So we eventually had an opportunity to move to a 100-acre farm from 10 acres. Again, I won't explain too much about how that happened, but we did it, and we had a huge, ambitious goal to basically also create like the next Stone Barns was like our big vision in our head with education, events. We did have some potential investment in the beginning stages to like build a huge barn, which would be a multi-purpose event center and do education, have classes and workshops and a kitchen and just a whole big, very ambitious goal. We even formed a board with a lot of older people on it because we were all, young, early 20s, you get the idea.
Yeah.
And it was this was like about 5 years of my life was spent on this project right up until the moment I moved to Quebec. Because basically the project was going well in a lot of ways, but it also had all kinds of, issues. And just in the end, like the different people involved kind of decided to go in different directions. And so I met my now wife and decided to make the move to Quebec.
Just before you go there, did the project kind of explode? Or
I would say it dissipated.
It dissipated. So it
because
stopped.
the two people, it's a couple that ran the vegetable operation, which was really the biggest part. Like we all worked on the vegetables here and there. We weren't all necessarily like full employees of that project. They actually hired people each summer, but it was the biggest piece of the farm. And I made videos about the farm, and every month I put out this video, like just kind of like a music video of everything that went down on the farm that month. But yeah, like by the final year, it was just clear that we wanted it to be the last year. We weren't getting where we needed to go. The landowner was going to need more money from us to exist there because it was a really expensive piece of property in Princeton, New Jersey. Like within a few miles of that farm are like 6 prestigious private schools that, parents are spending like, I don't even know how much money.
What are these
to
colleges
send
called? They have a name.
Well, Princeton's an Ivy League university.
Yeah, Ivy League.
But all around Princeton, there's a lot of wealth, a lot of, just very like incredible properties, a lot of gentleman farms, very much like your FQT story, like a lot of the farms around us. And we had a vibrant small scale farming community for sure. And we'd always gather at the NOFA New Jersey conferences, the winter conference, the different meetings, and they all took place in mostly central Jersey, which is where we were. But there was a number of projects all around us where it was someone with quite a bit of money that, owned the land and was willing to invest, and they'd find the young, scrappy, hippie farmers to run it. And there was a lot of that kind of happening around us as well. But a lot of it was, some of it didn't work out, but a lot of it went really well. And more importantly, I think almost all the farmers involved, if they stopped farming, it was, they moved on to something that they needed to move on to and ended in a better place. Or if they kept farming, they just got better. They're now powerhouses and they're still killing it.
Yeah.
And the vegetable folks at our farm, they now are at a farm in New Jersey that's absolutely crushing it. And my friend actually, Alec, who was also a chef, but he was the head of the vegetable operation with his wife, Lauren. They now reside at Ironbound Farm, New Jersey, which is a cidery and like event space. And it is very, very epic.
Nice.
And he's the culinary director there currently. And they have like, I think weekends with like 400 covers in a single day at the restaurant, something like that. I could be wrong, but it's a really cool project. I hope to get them on the podcast at some point.
Or we go eat there together.
Yeah,
that'd be nice.
Honestly, and I know Alec will probably listen to this because I'll tell him to. But like best chef I know.
Ah, great.
Amazing food. Amazing.
Okay, so from there, how did you end up in Quebec?
I just met my wife actually at the end of every farming season, my crew there was basically like 6 of us that were the owners of the business, but then we would always have another, like at one point there was probably 14 people like living on the property of the farm. Like, some people living outside, and you can imagine again the picture. But yeah, we would go on a trip at the end of every season to celebrate. And one year we went to Montreal, and I won't go into extreme detail there either, but I met my wife serendipitously on that trip. And then we started to visit each other long distance, a 6.5 hour drive, like every month. And she came to the farm and has crazy stories because She was a city girl at the time.
So she would go there and she'd be like,
she came to the farm and was just like, what on earth am I doing here? And the best story, I'll say it quick. The first time she arrives, the first meal, we're all eating together. There's food dripping down all of our beards and faces, and we're wiping it on our pants. And she's like, oh, do you guys have a napkin or a rag or something? And we all look around. There's nothing. And Lauren picks up an envelope off the floor, like just a random garbage envelope, and is like, you could use this.
Oh my God.
And her mind was just like, what am I doing here? How did I get involved in this? But like 5-6 years after, well, I guess that was like 6 or 7 years ago almost. Here we are.
Yeah. And was it, it's funny, your rag story, because I just realized that it's been not more than a few years that we do have some, not napkins, but the ones that you clean.
Yeah.
At our home, I guess. Because we always use our jeans. We're like,
yeah, when you're a farmer, your jeans are a good napkin, man. And I'm still a bit like this. I prefer the dirty life, but we keep our house pretty clean. But it can be a bit of a struggle sometimes.
So you were making videos there also.
Yeah,
so
that's
is that how you fell into that, or fell in love with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was just making videos for fun. I always had an interest in it. And like about a year before I moved, I had started to do video like professionally, just freelance. I had made videos. It was always about farming, environment. So I made a video for this really incredible environmental organization in New Jersey called the Watershed Institute. They were one of the first watershed-based environmental organizations in the United States. For 75 years, I think they've existed. And just stuff like that. So then I moved to Canada, but I was in Montreal for the first year because that's where my wife lived at the time. But we knew we wanted to move to the country. And we were looking around a lot originally up north of Montreal. And for those that don't know, it's more of like a chalet and ski culture, you could say, up there.
Mountainous.
And it just didn't feel right. And one day we took a weekend trip to Sutton.
Yeah.
And I just noticed there was farms. There was the bucolic scenery that I envisioned in my brain. And I was like, let's switch to looking here. And just...
So Lou didn't have any parents or relationships here?
No.
Just like us?
It was a big move for her. And obviously, I had already made a big move. I moved to another country and was going through the immigration process at this point. So if anything, it was kind of easy for me to move to here because, for one, the city is not for me.
Yeah. So
I was really excited to get back to a country lifestyle.
And it's funny you say that because knowing you and what you do with your spare time, I can't imagine you in a city. I don't even know what you'd be doing in a city.
It's right. I got obsessed with learning to play hockey.
There you go.
All I did because that was all I could do. It was like the only way to enjoy living there for me was I just put my eggs in that basket and went to the rink a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that's how I'm here. Oh, and then I guess just to pull it forward, I met you at a Mercredi Fermier, a Farmer Wednesday at Beat de Betterave, which we referenced at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I had actually met you in the past at a NOFA New Jersey conference, but just, in passing, just like you had met lots of people at conferences. But and I said I do videos, but at the time I wasn't doing anything because I was also still in immigration process. And we decided to start making YouTube videos together. And then Market Gardener Institute hired me and I came full on and have been behind a lot of the content, also filming coursework and editing that and just making our weekly YouTube videos. So if you watch them, that's me behind the camera and behind the editing. Yeah.
Yeah. And talk about the project you did the last 2 summers. Really epic. Filming also with Chloe, Flora Mama, your neighbor.
Yeah. We have a new course that we've released. It's in French at the moment, but we're working on an English version about flower farming.
Yeah.
And initially, I was not going to be editing it. Our other video guy, Alex, was, but time constraints led me to be asked. And if you don't know, I'm an English-speaking person, and I've been learning French, but I was intimidated at first, but just decided, what the hell, go for it. Yeah. And it actually turned out to be really great, and it elevated my French like tenfold. Just have Chloe speaking in my ear all day.
Yeah, because you're editing in French.
Yes, editing the course in French. And that was a really cool project we're very proud of.
Yeah. She's epic. I hope we'll have her on the podcast. She's such a powerhouse. She's so beautiful, but she's so real, and her flower, it's just like her garden is.
Yeah, it's badass.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's sharp. It's on, like, she's just that, like, has it figured out. A really organized system. And if you want to know how to do it, she's a great person to tell you.
Yeah, I have a lot of stories about her because she was trained on our farm, and we're close friends now. But when I remember a lot of things when she started. A lot of, we'll save it for later. But
when we have her on.
Yeah, all right. So that's kind of your career path, and now we're here.
Yep, that's what brings us both here.
And also, I think, Chris, you could also talk about how passionate you are about the outdoors, but also about the philosophy of soil and being in contact with the systems. About tell us about how you see farming fitting in the world and why it's important. The whole ethos of, like, you're really clear about that, and when I hear you talk about it, for me it always sounds good because you're like you felt that, you thought that through,
Yeah, I would really say it's about, like, having a meaningful life. And I'm going to share a quote because it ties in here. It's from Helen Nearing, The Good Life, of course.
Oh, right.
The business of procuring the necessities of life has been shifted from the woodlot, the garden, the kitchen, and the family to the factory and the large-scale enterprise. In our case, we moved our center back to the land. And I feel like that's exactly it. Like, the necessities of our life, we've outsourced everything. We've put middlemen in between us and all the things that are most important. And, like, what this whole movement is about, what you and I are passionate about, what this podcast will be about, is all those various ways in which we can connect directly to our food, to our neighbors, to our community, to our work and what we do, to our own hands and bodies and the environment around us. I feel like it's just so clear when you zoom out and see that picture of, like, a meaningful life and a life that you would actually want to live. It's like so obvious why there was a back to the land movement. Why are so many people driven to this?
Yeah.
It's right there.
Yeah, I like hearing this because it's been a while, but I think for me, like, the transformation was exactly that. Coming from a more conventional upbringing, but then realizing this and living it and being transformed by it. Because building my house and doing all the things that we did, especially earlier on, really transformed me for the better. And I just, now obviously I look at business more, and I'm running a lot of projects, and I'm involved with many people, and I've learned different crafts that are more kind of typical business things. But I just feel that a lot of people are probably a bit lost in their lifestyle. And you talk a lot about meaning, but also just like they're doing something. Like on a farm, you're doing something. You're actively engaged in a creating process.
And it's real and physical.
And there's a value to it. It's not just like no offense for the gym and you're a trainer, but like, pumping iron is great, but it's not feeding anyone. It's not generating.
It doesn't have the same kind of meaning.
Yeah.
Even if it's meaningful to you, it's like a layer not as deep.
Yeah. And plus there's magic involved with growing stuff because you see the seed germinate, and then you have all the life force that's there, and then the environment coming into play, water, rain, sun. There's a lot of magic that goes into a garden.
Yeah, and you feel that too, and that's the thing that you can't really describe or quantify, but it's a feeling, and I think meaning is like that as well. Like, you can't define or even quantify it, but you really feel it.
Had you read Living the Good Life from the Nearings at that time?
Not at that time. I was well aware of them.
Yeah.
I was not as big of a reader, I would say, at that time, but I was very moved by a lot of things I had seen things on YouTube. Like I had watched what is his name? Dick Pronecke, like the guy that lived alone in Alaska and filmed himself in the 60s, I think.
Okay.
Super inspired by those kinds of stories. So yeah, for sure. And I just admired all of the older people around me that I could see they had been living this way for a long time. And I was like, man, they're such badasses. Like I want to be like that.
There's not that many around here anymore. Like the Eastern Townships where we are, there's an Anglophone community, and it was a farming community. And it feels like most of these, household farms have grown, and now they're bigger farms, and it's just not probably the same thing as it was like 50 years ago or 40 years ago.
Yeah, just like everywhere, at least for sure in North America, just the disappearance of farming. In general, like the amount of farmers.
Of small scale farming, we could say, because farms are still there, but they're
exactly
producing high volumes of corn.
and I don't remember exactly the stat, but I'm sure people have heard it. A lot of people, like back early 1900s, something 70 or 80% of people were farmers or involved in growing food, and now the number is, again, I don't know the number, but maybe like 10% or some very small number. No, it's smaller than that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
for us, except for Fred that we talked about earlier, like there's not that many well-seasoned growers that were here when we started, or that became like references or go-to people. And I think part of, I would say, I don't want to say success, but our kind of tinkering was the fact that we didn't have a really model to follow. So we fought it through, and then we found certain keys and certain ways of doing things, kind of because we didn't have a model to replicate too fast. And that was, we were pretty original in doing what we were doing. But in the end, what's funny is like what we are doing at our farm is the same thing that farmers were doing 200 years ago, and that Elliot Coleman picked up, and other farms now I know have been doing for many, many years, because market gardening is pretty... it doesn't, you figure the same principles at one point.
Yeah, like what did people do when the necessities of life demanded it, essentially, right?
Yeah, and back in the days, they had cloches, and they didn't have row covers, they didn't have irrigation, they didn't have plastic films. It was just like, I have a lot of books on that era of farming, and it was, I say this often, but these farmers, especially in France, but also here, they were growing year-round, and they were the most productive farms that you can imagine, like 8-9 successions per year on a bed, multi-cropping, multi-species, like working 18-19 hours a day, which we don't do, thankfully. But, the heritage of small-scale farming, I think it's an ongoing continuum. And today I just feel that it's important to be present for the younger generation, and not to preach to them, because, as you were, the rebel, and also, but to show that you can have a good life in farming, and that it's possible, and it's desirable. It's desirable.
Let's bring all this in now to what this podcast will be.
Okay.
What do we want it to be? How do we see its growth and where it's going to go? So, Jam, what is the Digging Deeper podcast to you?
Yeah, I think what we're doing today won't be what it is. Like, I think today we're setting the stage. We're talking about ourselves a lot. I think that's going to be dealt with, and we can move on from that. Especially me. I don't want this podcast to be about me. I think we want to bring people in physically. This is a podcast where our guests will be with us. That's what was important for me. Like I get the video conference all the time, but I'm interested in real connections, and we're at the old mill. So if most of our guests, hopefully they'll come and have a meal at our farm to table, and then they'll understand what we're doing here. But it's about discussing about farming, yes, but also food, community, agriculture, like restaurant, like just like this agrarian lifestyle and the modern twist to it, bringing people that are interesting, people that are doing stuff, that are impacting or influencing our movement. These are probably not big names, if I can say that. Just like folks that we perhaps don't hear about or don't know about, but they're kicking asses and they're doing stuff that is interesting
and making an impact.
Yeah, making an impact, or just kind of living this life that we're talking about, or have been doing it for a while.
Yeah, and what do you think what's the point of talking about, like having conversations with these people? What are people going to get out of it, the listener?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a slow podcast. It's going to be long format. I think we're in agreement, you and I, with that. I like taking the time to go and have real discussions and visit things together. So, I think the listeners in this podcast, hopefully they're weeding their carrot beds, or they're doing something that doesn't
they're cooking. Or
yeah, it's like this is going to be slow radio or slow YouTube. But yeah, just like a bit like we did with the Growers & Co magazine, just like visiting what people are, their lifestyle, their why. And I think all of this is important to answer you, Chris, because we need to keep this spirit alive. We need to keep talking about this so that, first of all, perhaps newcomers to this get inspired and they're like, wow, there's people that are doing this, thinking about this, talking about this, living this lifestyle, this agrarian lifestyle. But also for people that are in this lifestyle to not forget that they're not alone. And that's something that I've seen a lot. It's like we're on our farms or in our restaurants or whatever. And it's like we're busy, we're working hard, we're kicking butts, but there's a point where it feels like we're kind of alone in that. But actually, there's a lot of us thinking the same thing. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Ubi. Ubi stands for Out of Our Own Backyard, and it's an online platform built for small farms and food hubs just like you. So they'll help you increase sales, simplify packing, and optimize deliveries, all so that you can focus on what you do best, which is growing incredible food. Hundreds of independent producers are already using Ubi to sell directly to local customers and build thriving businesses. And here's a special offer just for the Market Gardener listeners. Mention the podcast at sign up and Ubi will give you 75% off the onboarding fee. That's right, 75% off to get you started selling today. Ubi, 4osby.com, putting small scale back at the heart of the food system.
Yeah, and usually we only really are reminded we're not alone at the annual conference in the wintertime or something where we see all the other farmers and we're like, oh yeah, you're all here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I chime in?
Sure.
You were saying about like how we need to talk about this, and I kind of think this too, like we need to talk about it because if people don't talk about this, if there's not a buzz and we're not creating energy just around all these things we're saying today, it's really easy for the world to just go in a direction I don't think we want it to go. And I have a quote from Charles Eisenstein. Do you know him, the author? Sacred Economics and...
No, I've never read him.
Yeah, he was in a documentary a friend of mine made about permaculture years ago. And that's how I first learned of him. But he has an idea he frequently talks about of like the progress of the world at the moment is heading to a place where like, yeah, we could survive, but you'd be living in a world of concrete and like animal shit, basically. And he's like, that's not a world I'd want to live in. And he has this, it's a bit long, but I'm going to read it because I think it's pretty powerful. He's writing in an essay, and he's asking you to imagine a nightmare world where the entire biosphere has been converted to a giant feedlot and industrial park, where we manage the planet like a machine with technological tweaks to its gross material components, where no species exists that has not been turned to human purposes. It is a world wholly toxic to life, except within artificially maintained enclaves. It is a world of vat-grown meat, computerized hydroponic greenhouses instead of farms, algal pools for oxygen, carbon-sucking machines to regulate the atmosphere, desalinization plants, climate-controlled air filter bubble cities, and a planetary surface converted to one huge mine and garbage dump. In that world, human life is entirely dependent on technology as we retreat from the ugliness we have brought into an artificial or even a virtual environment. Can you say that this isn't already underway? That is not a world I would want to live in. And it's like, when you just imagine this kind of world and like realizing we're on a march towards it to some degree, like where the focus is on just survival. And it's like, yeah, we can survive, but is it the world you want to live in though? Like, and I think a good question to ask yourself, and I thought of this too. I'm going to ask you right now, actually. If you imagine a place that you really would hate to live in, how would that place have to change for you to want to live there?
Man, I'm really moved by what you just read because I don't think I've ever kind of heard it so well articulated.
Like a scary sounding.
And it feels like really where this is heading. Like you think about Elon Musk and going to Mars and all this crazy shit about hydroponic farms and factories, and it's just like all the money's going there, technology and even regenerative farming. We should talk about that at another point. It never talks about regenerating biodiversity. It talks about sequestering carbon, and it's kind of like, what's the point of that? Like we want to regenerate biodiversity and landscapes, and we want to have animals, and we want to have plants, and we want rewilding the earth is what we need to do. What did you ask again?
Yeah, like if you imagine a place that you would hate to live in,
I would say Mars.
Well, or I mean more like is it a city or suburb or some like Posa or like the south? Like, if you imagine that place, how would that place have to change in order for you to want to live there? Explain the changes.
Yeah, well, I grew up in a suburb just like you did, and it's boring as hell. There's no. I think it's more than before, because when I grew up in the suburbs, there was still kind of the community aspect to it. People would get together for sports. People would get together. I would play football. We would train three nights a week, and we had all these, all these mamas that would cut oranges for us, and it was very communal. I don't even think that exists anymore. People are watching TV. They're on their screen. They're doing barbecues and they're going to restaurants, but are they really getting together again? But to answer your question, like, because I've revisited the suburbia in the last few years, we did a TV show on a family that we kind of took a family there and we made a garden and we showed them how to garden. And man, it changed their life. They had 2 young kids. We brought in chickens. We built the garden with them and the kids. And then we kind of taught them how to garden. And their life just kind of flipped. Gave a lot of sense, and they got super excited about it. And we were filming this, so it's pretty cool to see the evolution. And the neighbors got into it, and it just kind of spread like wildfire. Everybody was kind of interested in the garden. And I see that if a landscape like that was farmed, it could be really cool, because you have all these lawns that could be farmed. They could be growing nuts. They could be growing fruit trees. They could be growing vegetables. And they could be just like more self-sufficient. I think if self-sufficiency was brought into suburbia, it could be really cool how it would change how people relate to one another. And so it's not all desperate, but we don't see enough of that. Like, we need to see more.
Yeah, and that's why we need to create a buzz and a conversation. Like, I'm often reminded of this when I meet people that aren't at all part of this small-scale farming world, and they just don't really know anything about it. It's alien. They're like, huh? What are you talking about? Oh, do you have like a tractor or something? Yeah. Like, well, as if like the only thing they can think of about farming, if I'm like, oh yeah, I work in farming and education, they're like, oh, like corn or something.
Yeah.
Like they're just, it's alien.
Yeah.
And it's not that everyone needs to know a ton about it or like have it be the focus of their life. But at the very least, like we're all talking about AI right now. Like it's a buzz in the air. Like everyone is talking about that or thinking about it. Imagine there being that kind of buzz in the air about this, where like no one can escape it. Everyone's like, right. I should think a bit about where my food is, and like, it would be nice to have some food that has like a story behind it and that my neighbor grew, and it's not just lab grown, made by robots in a factory, like something with some meaning to it. And
but there's a lot of us having these, we think about this all the time.
Yeah, we do.
And there's a lot of us, and just like opening the restaurant for me was also that. It's like not just sharing my passion for growing and hosting, but just like talking to people that for them, coming here, it's an experience where they eat fine food grown with care by all these people that who care. And you see that there's a lot of people that are interested and committed to that. And just like taking the trip to come here in the countryside and have a meal and share that ethos. I think what got me interested in the restaurant kind of world is also that, like chefs that are connecting with farmers, that are talking about local foods, cooking with local ingredients, eating in season, learning how to cook, learning what to eat. All of this, it's crazy that people just don't know.
Yeah, because we don't need to, and for better or for worse, like we've all been freed from needing to do a lot of things that once everyone had to do, but we've also lost something in that.
I think we've lost
a lot.
Yeah, because, when I think about the future, the bright future is, and I'm reminded of this anytime I go to France, like you'll go to the farmer's market and you'll have 16 varieties of tomatoes, and customers, they know this is the beefsteak that they want. This is the cœur de bœuf. And, they'll go and find their specific product from an artisan, and it's ingrained in who they are as a country. It's their values, like eating, talking, and sharing these beautiful moments around a glass of wine and good bread and an amazing piece of cheese. That's it. Perhaps some charcuteries. But all this simple thing connects people. They're together, they're talking, they're together through that simple fine food. And I think that's what I'd like to see more here. Less supermarkets, less all of that bullshit. But just like these, and you were talking about your passage at that communal farm, and I'm pretty sure that eating was a major focal point where you would all come together, and that's what that farming life was also. It's like eating.
100%. Like just eating together is central to being a human, and you kind of can't really deny that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think this podcast will also be about that.
Yeah, let's actually that makes me think. Let's talk about some of the kinds of people that we want to have on to give people something to look forward to. For sure, farmers. I feel like we've said enough probably about that.
Yeah.
Chefs. Why do you want to have chefs on? What's kind of interesting there, you think?
I think like from hanging out with some of them and meeting them through the years, like they're very passionate about food. And the I don't want to say the better ones, that's not the right word, but the most the ones that are more that I like the most, let's just put it that way. They're very into their ingredients. Like where their ingredient comes from is, for them, it's like this is what they're about. So they're excited about farmers, they're excited about the artisans, all these fine products that they cook with. That's what gets them excited.
Yeah.
And I've seen it so many times, bringing vegetables to them. We open the boxes and they're almost crying, taking, the kohlrabi, and it's like, oh my God. And it's just like, they're so passionate about it. And this is the kind of passion that I think is contagious, and especially that some of them, they have restaurants that are quite influential. So, talking about that for me is important. And now that I have a restaurant here, I'm part owner of this restaurant, the Old Mill. So I have a responsibility to that kind of trade. I want to talk about that, but I relate to people that are interested in eating good food, because that's the other aspect of my life. Like, I like to farm, I like to work, I like to develop projects, and I like to eat good food. So I want to talk about that.
Absolutely. How about activists, or maybe even more generally, I could just say, entrepreneurs, small business owners that are working on things to have an impact and improve the world in a number of the ways that we've discussed today?
Well, I'd like to hear you about that. For me, I don't want to over prepare this podcast. I'm excited about taking this moment to learn what people are doing and who they are. So I guess for me, and I'd like to hear you on this, but I'm kind of interested in discovering people that I perhaps know a little about, but that come here and that like and I realize that what they're doing is epic, and I'd like for us to kind of discover these people as we're having conversations with them. This episode is brought to you by New Society Publishing. For over 40 years, New Society has been at the forefront of publishing books that inspire positive change all over the world. Farming isn't just about hard work, it's also about knowledge, and it's also about stories. And that's where New Society comes in. They published my first book, The Market Gardener, which has brought thousands of people to the world of small-scale farming. And I can tell you, friends, New Society is more than a publisher. They are a driving force in the movement toward a better and greener future. Hop over to newsociety.com, check out their books, and use the promo code SmallFarm25 to get 25% off on all of their books. It's a sweet deal, friends. New Society Publishers, cultivating change one page at a time. I love this. Now let's get back to our program.
Absolutely. Like, for instance, I won't say who because it's coming soon, though. We're going to interview someone that has a software, I believe, that helps small farms distribute or like do CSA sharing. And it's an app or a something like that. And that's like exactly it. It's like people that are working on, like helping farmers, helping people, communities have meaningful experiences with food and with their community. And so just all kinds of people. Like this isn't just like a farmer to farmer podcast. We really want to talk about the big picture and learn and discover, like you say. I really like that because there's so many, I discover people on podcasts frequently, and it's just always empowering and inspiring and makes me think. And sometimes it motivates me to do something. And that's what we want to do here.
Yeah. Are we ready to close this baby, do you think?
I'd say we're getting there. How about we end with some rapid fire questions? And we're thinking we'll probably do something like this most of the time. It is our first recording, so not totally sure yet. But I'll just ask you some simple questions, and then if you want anything to ask back, go for it. But what book have you read more than once, or if not, that you give to people often?
There's obviously the book that comes to mind for me is Elliot Coleman's The New Organic Grower. I probably read The New Organic Grower 30, 40 times. There was a time where there wasn't internet, and researching for how to do things was very different. It was through books. And at that time, that was the most practical, hands-on advice on small-scale farming that I had. Mm-hmm. And, each winter I would reread the book and discover new insights, have more clarity on what Elliot was describing, because I was getting more, knowledgeable about these things because I was experiencing them in the garden. So clearly that was very influential for me. And for anyone that has read The Market Gardener, my book, and you can really see how it's framed a lot like The New Organic Grower, because that was my biggest inspiration. So that's one. And there's another book that I give a lot to other people, and there's no English translation for it, so I haven't offered it to you yet, Chris. But this book is called Le hasard n'existe pas. So that would translate to Le hasard is serendipity. Is not a coincidence.
Not a coincidence. Okay.
And so things come together for a purpose. And it was a book written in the 50s by this German, French-speaking philosopher. And I read this book often because it reminds me that when we're opening our hearts and then we're just kind of like in tune with what we're doing, we're on our X or whatever, like things happen, and that's all part of a bigger scheme, and it's perfectly okay and it's perfectly fine, and we need to be more in tune to that and think less about it and just kind of understand that that's a process that is there. And so I really believe in that, and my life is a combination of all these great circumstances that just came by luck together, but not by luck.
It's
And
really crazy, the name of this book, because you want to know a slogan that I keep in the back of my mind, honestly, since I was maybe 23, is when I first discovered this. And it's be open to serendipity.
there you
And
go.
I read that in a book about play research. It was all about the play, like in humans, like what is play, and because I was passionate about adults actually needing more play in their lives, like just being too, like not having that. It's a very body experience. And he wrote this idea of just being open to serendipity is like inherent in play. And then like everything that's happened in my life that's been good, it's almost always serendipitous. And it wasn't chasing something too intensely. It was kind of like, that feels right. I'm going to move in that direction. And so I find that a really powerful guiding force, just like you do. And I think that's pretty darn cool that book has that title.
Yeah,
that
and it's a red book. I'll see if I can find.
Maybe I'm ready.
And it's funny because there's another book that is very different. Like people know this book because of the movie Elizabeth Gilbert.
Yep.
Eat, Pray, Love.
Yep.
The book is actually really good. The movie's like
Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah, Eat, Pray, Love.
I've read it. Yeah, it's a good book.
It's a good book. I like that book. But that author Elizabeth Gilbert, she wrote another one called Big Magic.
I've read that twice.
And there you go. And she talks about how, we have geniuses that are around surrounding us. Ideas are surrounding us. And when we're open to them, they just connect and we attach to them. And then that's inspiration. But it's more than that. It's something that's in the air and wants to live.
Yeah, and it's Rick Rubin says similar things.
Yeah, he
about
does.
That ideas are there, and it's a matter of it kind of coming to you.
Yeah, we see a lot of him now, eh? Like he had a Netflix special about him, and then
I know he's been on podcasts.
Yeah,
I've
no,
seen
but
that.
you should look his he has a movie. It's really cool.
Yeah, he's
how
an inspiring guy.
Yeah, worked with all these famous songwriters and artists. So yeah, I think both of us we believe in that, and I would say, like, for me, religion is probably all of that in the old days where you needed to kind of have a story about how this works and some guiding principles to explain this, because it's invisible. So it's God's will, it's whatever, Allah's way, whatever. And then since in our times, there's a lot of us that didn't grow up in a religious environment.
Yeah, we're not religious people, a lot of people.
But the truth is that the truth is there anyway. So we're finding new words to explain this, and we're rediscovering. But recently I was in a farming conference, and I was actually invited to give the keynote address, which is always a really great privilege, and I talked about God. Yeah. And it was I don't know, I don't want to say a coming out, but it felt good.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I don't pray to God, I pray to life, and I pray to the life force that's out there, but God is also all of that,
Yeah, maybe it's the same thing, just different names.
Yeah. So, anyway.
What advice did you hear in your 20s that you only appreciated much, much later in life?
Wow. Measure twice, cut once. I did. I just like, that sounds so simple, but it's true for so many things.
Yeah, you can expand that out to more than a construction action.
Yeah, and for some reason, I've always been really eager to do stuff. I get the impulsion, I do it. And I'm I'm famous. All the people that know me, it's like I always say, ready, shoot, aim. That's how I operate. Because I'm a believer that you do things and then you figure them out as you're doing them. But as I'm growing, what's the word? Not older, but
just
it's like as life is like
maturing.
Maturing. Like the consequences of just jumping into something. I'm thinking more about, okay, do I really want to do this? What's the impact? Like, should I perhaps double check this? Should I sleep on it? Should I do a business plan? Opening a restaurant for me was like, I would never do that again. If this was to be, if rewind 2 years ago, all the level of energy and all that I left on the table to do the project here, I would never do that again. It's too much. I almost died of it. So that's my answer. But I'm returning the question to you.
Yeah, mine was going to be slow down.
Slow down.
Like, I just remember being told this more than once very early on. And I was just too eager and ambitious and wanted to move. For better or for worse, a lot of that is good because you learn and then you come and you mature. But now I'm like on a much more, like, yes, I want to attack things when the moment is right, similar to you. Like when this podcast idea came about, I really wanted to just go and figure it out as we go. But we took our time and we planned and I just have more of that mindset now. And I know why anyone that's older will often say that to younger people.
Yeah.
Because it's like you think you don't have a lot of time when you're 20.
But you do.
But you have way more time than you usually think.
Yeah.
And I feel like even when you're 40, there's actually still a lot of time. And if you're like, doesn't matter what age, if you're 100, perhaps maybe you don't have as much. But I feel like there's usually more time ahead than the pressure we put on ourselves.
I like that you say that because now in business, I've changed. I'm adopting like a rule of thought when we're together and we're talking about strategies or business. And I'm really thinking 5 years. Like the decisions that we make day to day for me in the different projects and businesses that I'm involved with, like I want to bring that insight. Like, let's think it 5 years. Like this podcast. Like we're not doing a podcast to close it down in a year. This is a 5-year project. And so we took the time to set it up nice, to imagine beautiful guests that will come here and a beautiful setup for them to be hosted. And so I think thinking in terms of 5 years puts the brakes on certain things that you're like, perhaps I don't want to do that 5 years. And it just kind of focuses you on places where you actually do want to invest a lot of time.
Good way to think.
Yeah. So that's new. And if I may.
Yes.
I don't want to go too deep here, but there's another thing that I'm, at this point of life, because perhaps of some of the struggles that I've faced in the last few years, which was really unexpected. My life was going great. Everything was working fine. And then there was a few fumble and a few things that happened to me that kind of shook my foundations. And, there's a teacher that I follow and that I listen a lot when I'm in the car. And he said that, just something that I'm wondering what you think about this, but we're always kind of like, because we're thinking in terms of, okay, I should be training, I should be eating better, I should be meditating, I should be, all these things that I should be. And he says, you're not a human being living a spiritual experience. You're a spiritual being living a human experience. And when I hear that, I'm like, okay, it's all good, man. Like I am a spiritual being and you are also, in my opinion. And we're living this human thing and we're eating not always perfect and we're not training as perhaps we could. And we're not, I don't have a balanced lifestyle. But that for me also makes it okay to just kind of go with what's there.
Yeah, it's not necessarily about the should.
Yeah.
But if it feels right, then
it's great.
Then it's right.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And there's a step for everything. We talked about now that we're a bit older or wiser or more mature, we understand the virtue of taking your time. It's like, that's something you need to go through.
Yeah. And you're, I think, 10 years ahead of me. So another, I can't
I'll be the wise
how
man
much
here.
I'm going to learn in the coming 10 years of my life because so many things are just beginning now. So
well, for me, it's going to be interesting to follow this path with you, Chris, because you definitely have a deep insight on things and you're a very reflective person. And because I have 10 years more than you, it's going to be interesting to follow your evolution in the next few years.
It is interesting. Okay, I have a final question. Artificial intelligence.
Ooh la la.
I know. Let's create some buzz. What excites you the most and what scares you the most about it?
I really like working with it. Like in my writing, it's for me, it's a big game changer because all the ideas that I have or the knowledge or whatever, like whatever I'm exploring and I write a lot. I write almost every day. I've been writing for 20 years every day. AI allows me to just write faster, better. Not the ideas, but just like the format.
It just helps you generate.
Oh man, it's like instead of taking 5 hours I don't want to say 5 hours to write an email, but let's say I want to write a beautiful letter for something or someone that I want the impact to be there. It takes a lot of time to craft all the words, make sure that it's all in the right sequence and that the format is. Then you put that in ChatGPT and it's like, boom, there you go. It's there. And for me, this gives me a lot of time and I like what it does. And I chat with it a lot. I'm like, hey, what do you think about podcasting? What could Chris and I do to improve it? And then I'm interested in what he tells me, what it tells me.
Interesting.
So I chat a lot with it and I like this format. And I'm envisioning that probably this is going to expand and it's going to become somewhat of a human kind of like presence eventually. It's probably going to become more interesting than most of my friends, I would say. And that's scary. And the scary part is all of that. Like, you talked about that analogy about how, the world is a factory and, we're just kind of like, it's a feedlot for animals that we're eating.
And we just survive.
But the reason why we do this with animals is that we're more intelligent than them. And so we treat them as subpar creatures. That if we keep on doing this, I don't see how AI is not going to treat us that way because it's going to be 1,000,000 times more intelligent than us.
Perhaps. So
that's my thing. And I want to hear you on this, but I just don't know. I don't think there's no coming back except if there's a major reset. Like like you've watched, what is that movie, The Matrix?
Of course, The Matrix, Terminator as well.
Yeah. But The Matrix had it good when, the robots took over, so they clouded the sun, so that, the robots couldn't operate because they didn't have any sunlight. So they took the energy from the humans.
I don't remember this.
Yeah, it's kind of that's the part that scares me. So I want to hear you about it.
Just the good is probably just being used in specific tools. Now, but I'm not, I actually do not like the writing features yet of ChatGPT. I'm not a fan so far. Not saying I couldn't ever be, but thus far I haven't been happy with that, and it's not something I use, but I get it. But just like how it could maybe be used, like there's softwares that might help me in editing this podcast because apparently AI will detect who's talking via the face, and it could switch the camera and things like that, obviously. And I think the scary part among all sorts of doomsday scenarios is more immediate, and I think it's more just what bad things people can do with it, like what things bad people could do using it. It's probably the more direct threat at this point. That's what's scary at the moment. But anyway, that's really an aside. Just wanted to.
You went there. You opened that door, but it's really factual. This is what's going on right now, and
and it's in the air, and it affects us all. So anyway,
I just want to add one thing. It's like there's a lot of rhetoric out there that I really dislike, and it's funny how. When we talk about big magic and how creativity happens and works, it's like when we imagine things, it happens. It's like anything that's generated out there starts in the mind. So if you have a whole population that is thinking doomsday, that's what's scaring me. It's like all these movies about doomsday and all this violence and all this. It's always the same story. It's like we're fighting this thing and we're fighting among each other and I think, I wonder if we're at one point are going to become aware that if we feed our mind this kind of storyline, it's bound to happen. And we should change this narrative and talk about nature, how, nature is epic. Like, it's incredible. Like, when you look at nature things, even those videos about, what's his name, Michael?
Attenborough?
Yeah. And just that, but let's say we get in awe with the magical aspect of life and how things happen, and that becomes more of what we're all interested in. Man, that could change. It would be a powerful narrative, and it would change the course of biodiversity and the other species. Like, anyway, so
I know what you mean. And for sure, I'm definitely not one of those people that is worried about doomsday that much. But there are people that, like, that's their
it's their thing,
their whole thing, which is So anyway, I guess that's gonna.
That was a funny segment.
Yeah. I suppose,
next time we can talk about the climate change and the glaciers that are all melting.
Oh boy, we don't want to end on down notes, do we? So that's it, I think, for this first.
Yeah, it went well.
First recording. Yeah, I had a lot of fun.
It was very talkative at first, like telling our story. My story, I felt it was super long, but I think it's behind us.
But a lot of people don't know it.
Yeah.
So it's just listening to someone tell an interesting story.
Yeah. So I'm excited to do it again. And
I know. I don't really want to stop. This is fun.
I don't know who our next guest will be, or are we saying it or not? Or?
We won't say it yet, just because in case we change up the order of release or anything like that.
Okay. All right.
We'll maybe in the future we'll be telling you about upcoming guests, but not yet.
All right. Well, everyone that's listening, it was a great pleasure to think about you listening here. And, I hope that you'll like the podcast and that you'll, what's the word? You'll subscribe? Do we say that?
Well, you can watch this podcast on YouTube.
Yeah.
And you can subscribe to our channel, of course. That would be great and helps us out. And you can listen to it on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and, download the episode. And we hope this grows.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great ending.
Just like we hope your garden grows.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
Hope you're enjoying the podcast. These are important conversations, and we're really excited to have them and to share them with everyone. You can check out the work that we do at the Market Gardener Institute. You can check out our website, themarketgardener.com. Our mission is to multiply the number of small ecological farms around the world. And we do this by offering training, online courses to new aspiring farmers, but also to seasoned growers. We're helping them take it to the next level. So you can check out the work that we do. You can follow us on social media. You can sign up to our newsletter to get a lot of freebies about gardening, farming, but also about how small-scale farming is changing the world. And that's really what we're all about, and that's really what this is all about. So again, super excited that you guys are on board. We are changing the world.